Back to these two.
Back to these two. And with that, we are live here at Creekwood Online Bible Study for Mark chapter 15. We hope you are joining along with us and will comment and say hi so we know who's joining us. Would love to hear if you are watching this later and participating along. Go ahead and comment along with any questions or comments that you have. And you can tell by looking at the screen today. Keri Lynn bought this really fantastic light, like a ring light for production, and I keep dragging my feet on this. So I usually just use the sunshine that's been prevalent, and today I'm just gonna be sitting in the dark. So
That's how we'll know it'll be time to be done. Is like when, after Jesus is crucified and the sky goes dark and David Lessner's room goes dark. It's over. That's the end of
that's
Bible
what
study.
we really should have timed this, or we really should add some theatrics to this week, and I could have had my kids come in and just shut the lights off right when Jesus says it is finished. If that were in Mark's
He
gospel,
doesn't
that
say
would
that
work.
in Mark. Ooh.
I know that's one of the things about like reading through the gospels with intention. Like I keep finding like, okay, this is when he's going to say this, and oh nope, doesn't say
Nope,
that this
it's not
time, and
that.
oh, this is
Yeah.
where I'm going to talk about this. Oh nope, not going to say that this time.
Yeah.
So I think it's really interesting just to read through and see which ones picked which thing.
Yeah,
So.
that's what I was like. Even I was being a goof, and I was like listening to like the last part of Jesus Christ Superstar while reading this today, because that's how
Mm-hmm.
I like to read the Gospel of Mark, apparently. And it goes through this whole song. So after Pilate in Luke, Jesus goes to Herod, and there's this whole thing of Pilate can't do anything, so he goes to Herod. And I was like, well, that's not in here. Like, Andrew Lloyd Webber, you failed me. Like, it was just this really funny moment. I was like, oh, right. Like, I don't know if I've ever looked at, particularly like in a crucifixion story, I think that's where we kind of synopsize everything and put it all
Mm-hmm.
together from all the gospels. Like when you do a Maundy Thursday service and it's the 7 last words, well, here, we're missing it is finished. And we're missing I thirst, and we're missing kind of some of these that there are whole songs and symphonies about. So it was a really funny exercise, even just for me today. I was like, oh, right, one at a time.
I love that you go like your first reaction was Andrew Lloyd Webber, you failed me, as opposed to like I was thinking like, oh, Mark, you left out the best part,
No,
but you went straight to Andrew Lloyd Webber first.
bless him. He has been like starting back with his like playing stuff for
Um,
people.
didn't he
But
do a
now
mashup of something?
maybe he did a really cool one where he played it, and then he allowed singers to like put their own like credenza on it, so their own ornaments and way of hitting a note and landing on a note for a Phantom of the Opera song, and that was really cool. Like he's involving so many other people in the
Right.
process, and yeah, he's kind of back to kind of putting some content out almost every day, which is fun. And
That's fun. I'm looking up because there was just one thing I saw where he did. I can't remember. He did like a mashup with one of his songs that had been being used for some internet thing that I mean, it was like an electronic mashup, like
oh
electronica and
wow,
Andrew Lloyd Webber together kind of
that's
thing. So I was like, way to have a sense of humor, man.
awesome. Oh gosh,
And
yeah,
Carry
bless
on, we
him.
are glad you are here, just so you know.
Yes.
Hope you and Andy are having a great day.
Oh my
So,
goodness.
I'm
I'm
trying
trying
to
to
think.
think if there's something like fun that we can ask the fans.
I think we could do like, what is your favorite rainy day activity? Just in honor of the rain that we're getting right now. And I'd have to say that ours is like completely, for some reason, when it rains, we think life stops in the Lessner household. Or at least three-quarters of us think the life stops in the Lessner household. And, but it's just like once it starts raining, we put on a movie and we don't do anything else,
Hmm,
is pretty much our MO on rainy days.
that's
We
awesome.
got Debbie with sleeping.
Yeah. I so when I got back to my apartment today, are like the way that our complex, like the driveways and the roads are, they're built terribly, so they flood really bad, but only like in the middle. It's just really interesting. And so when I got back, I just decided to take my shoes off, and I just like walked back to my apartment without my shoes. Like I just love like walking in rain puddles. That's probably gross, and like I don't know, I don't really
There's
care.
nothing gross about walking in rain puddles.
Well, I just almost never have shoes on. Like I keep it together at work, but a lot of the time in my office, I will totally take my shoes off because we work in a house. It feels like home. And so
True,
like,
true confession.
yeah,
Associate.
yeah, this is associate pastor unfiltered, I guess. I never wear shoes. So yeah, that's my favorite thing. I think with the rain, I loved splashing in puddles when I was a kid, and we had a street by my house when I was little that would flood really consistently, kind of like a river. And so we would always like try to ride our bikes and the water would stop us, and super safe. It didn't rain very much in Odessa, so we had to super take advantage of it when it happened.
Right? It's like a snow day.
I'm impressed that Keri starts cleaning when it rains, because even I don't start cleaning when it rains.
I do get like going out and cleaning the garage. There is something about being in a garage while it's raining, because it's like half outside, half inside. So you're dry, but you get to like experience the rain somewhat in full force. So I totally get that. It's kind of like they have this weird thing about being in a car while it's raining, because you feel like you're somewhat in the rainstorm, but you're not getting soaked and miserable the entire time.
Yeah.
We do like to go out and jump on the trampoline in the rain. Or after like and afterward when it looks dry but it's not, then you go jump and the water that's stored up underneath makes all these footprints and bounces up on you, and we're big fans of that.
Oh gosh, that's awesome.
Yeah. So all right, everybody, we can go ahead and get started. We've got, I imagine we'll probably have a decent amount to cover, and I need to bring up my questions that I sent.
You got
earlier.
A shorter chapter is all I'm saying. Last week I covered 72 verses.
Yeah.
A guest, and you are off the hook with only 47 and no guest.
Well, that means I actually have to talk. See, I was thinking maybe I would get a week where I'm just going to sit here and throw softball questions out and then like go take a snack break while y'all are answering them. But
just like sit and watch the madness.
Pretty much, yeah. I was going to throw out, controversial questions and then just sit and eat popcorn for a little while.
That's good. Good. Thank you for not doing that.
Right. No, we won't do that tonight. So anyway, if you're joining us, get your Bibles out, get your Bible app. We only have 2 more chapters of Mark, and one of those we're doing tonight. So we've been moving through, and I hope y'all have learned something or gathered something. We were talking at the very beginning about how we talk about the stories, especially like the crucifixion, as what we experience on Good Friday or Maundy, Thursday. And so we put all the details together and not realizing that like Jesus in Mark never says it is finished. Jesus in Mark never says, Father, forgive them for they know not what they do. So it's just interesting how we can see just in the Bible itself how like Matthew and Luke drew from Mark's story and then kind of added elements that they had picked up along the way or other thematic pieces to what they were trying to communicate. So it's just a great lesson in even within the Bible, we see evolution of sorts, and knowing that Mark was the first gospel, we're going to miss a lot of the stuff that we're used to. So I'm going to start reading from verse 1, and we're just going to do a short little section here, 1 through 5, real fast. So get your Bibles out, follow along. It says, as soon as it was morning, the chief priests held a consultation with the elders and scribes and the whole council. They bound Jesus, led him away, and handed him over to Pilate. Pilate asked him, are you the king of the Jews? He answered him, you say so, which is like snarky Jesus at his best right there. Then the chief priests accused him of many things. Pilate asked him again, have you no answer? See how many charges they bring against you. But Jesus made no further reply, so that Pilate was amazed. And I'm going to be amazed multiple times because Jesus like just continuously takes this and is silent the entire time. But one of the first questions here is, so Pilate, like, I think this is probably Pilate's first time to meet Jesus, and maybe even his first time to even hear about Jesus to some respect. And for those of you who don't know, Pilate is the governor of the Roman province that would be called Judea or Judah, I believe is what they called it. So Pilate, when there's this very rushed trial, we don't have all the details of the trial like in other books, and Jesus is brought to Pilate, and Pilate just straight up asks him, seriously, are you the king of the Jews? I want to know. Later on, we're going to see him using that as a very mocking tone, like toward the Jewish officials about Jesus. So when you look at what Pilate's doing here, do you think Pilate is mocking Jesus, mocking the Jewish leaders, or both? What do you, I guess, what do you think Pilate's attitude toward them is?
So I did a little bit of research on this, and we'll talk about it now and later. So when Jesus is called the King of the Jews, there's a couple of implications that come with it, and I think that that's important to understand when kind of answering this question about Pilate. So, first of all, if we do look in other Gospels, Jesus is called the King of the Jews, apart from the crucifixion episode, only one other time. And that's at his birth when the Magi come. And the person that they ask for when they go to Bethlehem is the King of the Jews. That's how they identify this baby. And now again, that's in Matthew. That's not in Mark. In Mark, Jesus is not born. He just kind of shows up. If we remember way back from chapter 1.
Spontaneous generation. He just appeared.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think, it's important, and I'm going to keep harping on it tonight. Take Mark for what's in Mark, and then also synopsize what's in everything else. So for taking Mark, what's in Mark, when Jesus is called the King of the Jews, there's a spiritual implication. Back in the Old Testament, from your friendly neighborhood Old Testament nerd, a king was always a man who was anointed for leadership over the country of Israel. And he was typically anointed by, they would straight up pour oil on his face, which not the best inauguration day parade ever. Kind of gross. I've always wondered, that not hurt, or did the Kings not break out in a ton of zits the next day because
I was thinking acne for sure. Yeah.
Yes. And especially some of these that were 13, there was some awkward face happening. They were pouring oil on their faces. But so there's a spiritual implication to being called the King of the Jews. This was a king was anointed by a prophet. That prophet learned from God who the king was going to be. So it was kind of believed that the Most High chose the king, which made him a spiritual leader. To Pilate, that doesn't matter, right? He's with the Roman state, which is occupying what was Jewish country and now is not primarily Jewish anymore. And so the phrase King of the Jews has a little bit more political implications, I think, from Pilate's context. But I don't read from this that Pilate's super threatened by that.
Right.
It's are you King of the Jews? Because they don't like you very much. I think I've always wondered, I feel like Mark, Pilate's not that bad. Which is horrible to say. Because I've always been why do we say in the Lord's Prayer, suffered under Pontius Pilate? Why don't we say suffered under the religious people?
Right.
So there's political assumptions that come along with this. But there's this really interesting piece that Jesus is claiming to be King of the Jews, but is rejected by the Jewish leaders. And so part of me has wondered, with Pilate, is it like a very strange, I think that person's bullying you. Are you their king? Because it doesn't look like it. You're not doing a great job.
Nobody really likes you. But
yeah. Nothing's going well in this moment for Jesus. So I think it's more, I hate to say mocking, because I don't even know if Pilate's mocking. I think he's almost just looking for clarification as to what in the heck this insane trial that we don't have details of, but that's taking place. I think Pilate, it's like a parent, I'm assuming a parent, just from watching my parents, when they would come in and the three of us would be like, "Meow, meow, meow, meow," and then somebody finally is like, "What's going on?" I think that's Pilate. Like, what's happening here? Like, are you the king of the Jews? Is that what you're claiming? So
are you
yes
the king
and
of
no
the
to your
Legos
question.
right now? Are you the king of the chaos? Yeah.
Right.
I think, yeah, it is interesting because, and it's interesting you bring up that Pilate doesn't seem that bad in Mark because I don't know if it's Luke or somewhere, maybe, I don't remember which gospel it is, but there's some other ones where Pilate almost just seems frustrated that he's caught in the middle and he almost seems like he can't. And I know there's a movie version somewhere where Pilate's like really indecisive and it's like his wife who makes it,
Yes.
who's like,
The
yeah,
one with his wife. She's like,
yeah,
yeah. She has
she's
a
the one.
dream. And she goes
Yeah.
to him and she's like, "Don't let them crucify Jesus today." And he's like, "What?"
Yeah. I don't know, it's just interesting because there have been times when I'm like, I think Pilate's just kind of a pawn in this. And then, but we also know like historical records of Pilate talk about like he's a really not nice guy.
Yeah.
Like he's shrewd, he's calculating, and he's just forceful. And if you come across his plate, he's not spending the time to get to know you, like asking you inquisitively, like, "Hey, are you really the king of the Jews? Please tell me about this. I feel sorry for you." So it's kind of an interesting take on Mark that Mark and some of the other gospels that Jesus and Pilate even have this long of a discussion.
Yeah.
So it is kind of, and we'll get some of that later about Pilate and Jesus's interaction. Um, I do think it paints Pilate as confused, which I think that when we get into modern times and we start talking about modern leaders and when there's a conflict between religion and state, or when there's a conflict between even religious leader and religious person, there's often I don't think the leaders are necessarily terrible or bad. I think there's just often this like incredible amount of confusion because what Jesus is doesn't fit inside the schema of what Rome thinks. Um, and same today. Um, so Jesus here is also silent again. He was silent in front of the Sanhedrin earlier when they were quizzing him, or when they were putting him through the screws. Um, do you see this as like Jesus accepting his fate, or is this a strong silence? Because not many people, when they're being asked sarcastic questions or inquisitive questions, like Jesus is not fighting for himself here. So what is your take on the silence?
So I thought a lot about this. So Jesus is silent, but in this case, he does answer the direct question,
Yeah.
right? So I thought a little bit kind of earlier with the Sanhedrin, like there's no like direct question, I think, that Jesus answers, like that's asked of him. It's all like, and no offense if there's any watching, but like it's all like lawyer, like trickery questions kind of deal. And I think Jesus kind of, in his silence, refuses to put up with that, like
The
tomfoolery
shenanigans.
kind of deal. Yeah, shenanigans is a great
Yeah.
word.
Well, it even says like there are multiple charges against him, but it doesn't like specifically narrow down anything. So it is kind of we're just throwing darts at a wall to see which one Pilate's going to take.
Right, right. Yeah. So what I think is interesting is what it says here in Mark in verse 5. It says, "But Jesus made no further reply, so that Pilate was amazed." So, and again, in the Gospel of Mark, and we've said it from the very beginning, but it's really important with these last two chapters, what Mark decides to include should be paid attention to, right? And so when we get this piece of information about Jesus's silence has an effect on Pilate, I think there's this kind of throw to, this is going way different than anything I've ever done before, right? Like I doubt any innocent person who's being charged with something that's going to result in their death sat in front of Pilate and said nothing.
Right.
And so I think that's just where, because I think we're going to see, it's going to kind of track through the rest of Jesus's death until the centurion has his little moment a little too late. And I think that starts here. I think Jesus is starting to, and again, with the insiders and outsiders, isn't it interesting that after one interaction with Jesus, Pilate walks away amazed? But
Yeah.
yet the disciples who were with him for 3 years and had every other reason to be amazed because Jesus did stuff like miracles, not talk,
Right.
are gone and have left him.
Well, and not to spoil going into verse 40 at all, but it's like the women were watching from 30 yards or feet or whatever away. Like they're out in the back and they can't see everything or hear everything, but they're the ones who stay faithful and loyal. And so it is really, the outsiders who are amazed by this.
And the boys are just running around without clothes on and cutting people's ears off, as we learned last week.
Somebody who ran away naked. You know what? Guys get a panic sometimes, and we have more fight or flight than rationality, perhaps.
It's great.
I think there are some details in here that are setting this up so that, like, the reader in Mark's time would have known just how unfair of a trial this is, to set up that scene of injustice that's going on toward Jesus. We've got like the kangaroo court that happens before they even get to Pilate. And then they've just got wild accusations that they start throwing around, and they think they've got some blasphemy, but they may not have some blasphemy. And then they're trying to paint him as an insurrectionist. Like, even the brief consultation that they have is kind of like they're just grasping at straws, and Mark wants us to know that they don't have a case. And even I think Pilate's amazement speaks into that. So let's
to show that there's no case in the religious court and no case in the state court, is to a early first century Markan reader, is a really interesting thing, because at the time, like, the early Christian movement would have been martyred by the state for their religion, right? So just like some of those, like, I don't know, there's just some things we may never comprehend contextually, thank God, but isn't it interesting?
Yeah, and if people watching or don't conceptualize the levels of judgment that are happening, you've got, so Jesus, let's just call him a commoner here for the sake of, the court system that's going on. So you got Jesus the commoner, who is under the spiritual direction of, like, really the Pharisees and Sadducees are like the lead lay people, elders and deacons in the church, in not the United Methodist Church, but like in a Baptist church. And then you've got the priests, who are like the official ones. The Pharisees and Sadducees are bending the ear of the priests, who are on the Sanhedrin, who've got this determination in the Jewish circles of who's in or out and who's clean and unclean and who really is able to worship and who's able to be part of the community. But because Israel is occupied by the Romans, you've got this puppet governor, Herod, who has jurisdiction legally over the church of sorts, as well as the civil matters of there, but they're not allowed to put people to death in their law. So, so Rome is the occupying power. So Herod is a puppet government for Rome. And so Jesus has like multiple layers of people that he's trying to get through to show innocence, or he's got multiple levels. And I think on some level, the fact that he does get all the way up there is also another setup for, this guy's really innocent. Like, you need to show, because he would have either been ostracized from the community by the priests, he would have been dealt with by the Herodians and King Herod, but he makes it all the way to the provincial governor. Like, the only next step is like Augustus Caesar, or whoever happened to, I don't remember the Caesar at the time. And if he makes it up there, that would be, mega. So there are multiple levels here to show just how innocent Jesus is. So I'm going to read a large chunk of this. This is going to be verse 6 through 20, and then we're going to go through the crowd's reaction here. It says, "Now at the festival, Pilate, used to release a prisoner for them, anyone for whom they asked. Now a man called Barabbas was in prison with the rebels who had committed murder during the insurrection. So the crowd came and began to ask Pilate to do for them according to his custom. Then he answered them, 'Do you want me to release for you the king of the Jews?'" And I want you to read that with like heavy sarcasm, because he's already like put this question to Jesus, and Jesus is like, "You say I am." And I think Jesus' sarcasm rubs off on Pilate, and Pilate's just kind of done with all of this. So like he goes out to these angry Jewish people and is like, "Do you want me to release for you the King of the Jews?" Because he knows that he knows they don't think this.
Yeah.
So I think he's also showing his disdain for the Jewish people. Like it's kind of well thought of in history that the Jerusalem circuit on the Roman imperial tour is kind of the backwater. I don't want to compare it to anything because I have no idea the reach of our Bible study, and I don't want to upset anybody in what I would accidentally label a backwater of someplace in the world. But so you can just tell his disdain here. So all right, verse 10. For he realized that it was out of jealousy that the chief priests had handed him over. But the chief priests stirred up the crowd to have him release Barabbas for them instead. Pilate spoke to them again. Then what do you wish me to do with the man you call the King of the Jews? They shouted back, Crucify him. Pilate asked them, Why? What evil has he done? But they shouted all the more, Crucify him. So Pilate, wishing to satisfy the crowd, released Barabbas for them, and after flogging Jesus, he handed him over to be crucified. Then the soldiers led him into the courtyard of the palace, that is, the governor's headquarters, and they called together the whole cohort. And they clothed him in a purple cloak, and after twisting some thorns into a crown, they put it on him. And they began saluting him, Hail, King of the Jews! They struck his head with a reed, spat upon him, and knelt down in homage to him. After mocking him, they stripped him of the purple cloak and put his own clothes on him. Then they led him out to crucify him. So there's just some interesting. I mean, I think this is kind of one of the scenes we're all used to if we've seen Mel Gibson's Passion of the Christ or any of the Jesus movies. Honestly, they go in usually detailed, graphic detail of this so that we experience, because it was probably terrible. I think one of the things that is speculated on is they gave Jesus 39 lashes because 40 is like the Romans were so good at torture, they knew how many they could give somebody without them dying. But one of the weird parts about this story is I was doing some research on this earlier, and Romans are not known for compassion when it comes to anybody who's a rebel rouser, or like I said, they're trained torturers. Like they're really good at it. And so the idea that Pilate has this custom to release somebody doesn't fit in with any historical narrative that we have of Pilate was known as a cruel dude. The Romans were known as cruel to people they could care less about. Like keeping peace by diplomacy was not the Roman way. Keeping peace by hanging Spartacus up on a tree outside of a wall was the Roman way of keeping peace. So this is really unprecedented. And I think I'm curious if Mark adds this, the historicity of this story. And if he is, it's that the crowd is turned so against Jesus that they're willing to make the switch for someone who's a killer, a known killer, and Pilate is willing to take this risk for a killer who is also a Jewish nationalist who is actively trying to overthrow the government. So what is Mark trying to convey that the crowd and Pilate are willing to risk in this moment?
So it's a super interesting piece of narrative, whether true or not, right? So let's, and I don't know if the
let's
answer is
assume
different.
It's true. How about that?
Yeah, so let's go with the fact that it's true. Let's go with it. This is a custom that takes place every year. So it's interesting, right? Like it makes you wonder, what would we do if we were allowed at Christmas to vote for someone in prison to be released? And would we ever in a million years vote for somebody who murdered anyone?
Right.
And
I'm guessing the answer is totally no. I mean, I would hope, like, that seems pretty contradictory to most people's fears.
Right. And I think it's interesting because it's mentioned here that Barabbas committed murder during the insurrection, insurrection is what Jesus is eventually charged with. So Barabbas does what Jesus is charged with and also murders someone. Like Barabbas, it's like, even if Jesus was an insurrectionist, Barabbas is still worse.
Right,
Like,
exactly.
even if Jesus is not innocent, the crowd still picks somebody worse. And I think that kind of, even if it's not true, even if it's something added for narrative, I think it shows the totally insane priorities or easy sway of the crowd, right? Because it also kind of gives us the detail that the chief priest stirred up the crowd.
Right.
Like, it's somebody who is like objectively worse. And isn't that so interesting about, and I guess it's just a really fascinating thing.
Yeah.
How we can see real life in this, how quickly an entire crowd of people can be turned against someone because of some leaders.
And someone.
And again,
Yeah.
looking at it, someone who's objectively worse gets
Right.
to go free than the guy who gets to be tortured here. And it's not all Roman people that are here, right? Or that's not right. What am I trying to say?
Jewish people.
Well, yeah, it's like the crowd of people is not just Roman soldiers. It's not just people who torture for a living, right? It's normal people. It's slave girls who were telling Peter, I saw you with him.
Right.
It's the same people a week before were saying Hosanna and were welcoming Jesus as he came in. Like, true or not, it's a fascinating way of describing a crowd by describing how easily they can be swayed.
Yeah, totally. And the interesting thing about it too is, like, Jesus has a populist message. Jesus kind of takes religion out of the elitist hands, and Jesus promises this kingdom that's open to everybody. And Jesus is healing lepers. I mean, it's the equivalent of just promising a goose in every pot and the New Deal of FDR kind of thing. I mean, it really is a populist, everybody matters and your voice matters. We're going to appeal to the broadest audience message. And this is, we've talked about fear and we've talked about control and how people, but it's interesting that the one with the populist message who keeps saying this is going to get better for everybody is the one that everybody turns against so easily. Right. And I think it tells us something about it's kind of there, in every classroom I ever went to, probably up till middle school, there was this banner up there that said, what is popular is not always right, and what is right is not always popular. Yeah. And for example, like, there was that poll that went, I think last year, the United States voted that Taco Bell was the best Mexican restaurant in the United States. That strongly makes me question our judgment as people. So we've got, it just really is a fascinating thing of how crowd mob mentality can happen, and our opinion can get turned on a dime regardless of what the facts are. And I think this serves as another. So I guess this is a question I didn't send to you, but
Great.
So yeah, well, I mean, everyone knows we're talking about Jesus's crucifixion, and I'm assuming people who are aware of Jesus's crucifixion have some idea that Christians believe that in the crucifixion of Jesus, a right was in the wrong that was done to Jesus. A right happened for all of humanity, and we were atoned for our sin. Is a pretty classic Christian doctrine of atonement that has something to do with we don't deserve it, but we get it anyway. And here are two stories that almost go out of their way to show just how unfair this is, right? Like you said, Barabbas is objectively worse. The chief priests don't have a case. Jesus has made it up to the Supreme Court level and is still pretty much found innocent by the Supreme Court, yet they're going to kill him anyway. So in your mind, this is a good board-of-boarding ministry question, but in your mind, like, how does the unfairness of this moment play into the atonement theory, or how does the unfairness of this moment show just how marvelous Jesus' sacrifice is? And again, everyone, this was totally unscripted here. So
this is a board-of-ordained ministry question, and I already passed that thing. Which does not mean that we're done for life.
Right. And everybody, by the way, you can respond to this as well. I would love to hear everybody's
you people
thoughts.
Answer this question.
Yeah, you guys jump in. Jump in. So how does Mark setting this up as really unfair play into the way that we understand Jesus' crucifixion as a saving moment for us? I would love to hear y'all's answers on that.
So this is really fun because everybody gets to watch my brain process information. So when I think of difficult theological questions like this, I'll walk you through the process as I answer the question. This will be really fun. My brain goes to a category of theology to start with, but I also typically kind of go at what does this whole book get at? So from the beginning, right, whether you take Genesis 1 as figurative or literal is neither here nor there. The choice to sin is not fair to God.
Mm-hmm.
Right? In Genesis 1 with Adam and Eve, there is literally, objectively, more good choices that you can make than bad choices, because there's really just one bad choice, right?
Right.
And Adam and Eve do something wildly unfair to God and to one another. And that's sin, right? Sin is not fair at all. When we turn from God, and when we use the free will, the gift that God gave us to make good choices that are supposed to be about loving God and loving our neighbor, and we choose to do things that are not loving of God and not loving of our neighbor, we sin. And so I think that this, and again, Mark, what is the whole thesis of Mark? It's a lot on the humanity of Jesus, right? Like Mark kind of covers it at the beginning of like the good news of Jesus Christ, the Son of God. But then after that, it's all about how Jesus is a human person.
Right.
And I think it takes, I think the reader, we look at this and we're like, oh man, that's so unfair. But then we're kind of slapped with the reality of how unfair our own choice to sin is.
Right.
Because it's those sins that are written, that are atoned for in Jesus's death, right? So I think that's how I'd answer that question, as I would kind of
and you did a brilliant job of leading people through the thought process as well. Because, yeah, for those of y'all who don't know, that's what we get asked on the Board of Ordained Ministry, is to answer questions like that. And I noticed that nobody has chimed in to help us out. So I want y'all to dig deep and think about this, because and I asked the question, so I think it's fair. It must be fair for me to try and process through it too, even though it's just a question I had. I think what you're talking about sin being unfair to God, when God has given us such a precious gift of free will, and the way that we've mocked and abused it and everything, I think it is to see such an unfair judicial process lead to the ultimate salvation of all of us in the unfairness speaks to God's overwhelming grace over legalism. That if it's still unfair, and if we are still unfair, and God still chooses to do this, then it speaks to just how graceful and merciful God really is. And I think that as much as the gift of the garden and the much of the gift of free will and the much of the gift of life was supposed to be awe-inspiring, that for so many we've seen this willing participation in an unfair system, an unfair trial, and God still did it anyway, as incredibly awe-inducing. And so the fact that, and I will say, I've said this before on here, that like one of the things that I've not done in a long time is just read the Bible, read a chapter straight through, read a book straight through. And the more I've been doing it, the more I've been really awestricken by who Jesus is. And so I think this is another element where if Mark doesn't set it up as so unfair, then it's just a theological concept. Then we get the early church's understanding of crucifixion. We get people telling us it's atonement. We get Paul's letters. But Paul sets it up in a really kind of emotional way for me to say, this was really, really unfair. And I want you to see just how unfair it was, so that you know how big God's love is for you, that God was still willing to do this. And for those of us who think death is unfair, and for those of us who think pain is unfair, and all of those different elements, it shows us that in the unfair and uncertainty of life, God still operates in really strong ways. So I think that sets up that for kind of the eternal life piece, kind of the resurrection piece, kind of all of those things as well. So,
I forgot the grace part. My bad. I was bad
well,
Methodist.
that's all right. You wouldn't, yeah. If you're on by the way, if anybody is watching this who's going to go through the Board of Ordained Ministry, just say grace in every question that you answer that you have, and it's bound to get you at least some brownie points.
I
Because it
just
is
am a
one of
little rusty from,
the.
man, you prepare for that thing and then you get through it. And I swear the next day I woke up and forgot everything I ever learned.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I was asking the question out of genuine intellectual curiosity, but also for everybody listening. I think, one of the things is, I think you put it really well in that sin is God, and so much of what I think religion has become is what has God done for me lately,
Yeah.
as opposed to understanding the gifts that we've already been given and just how unfairly we have treated God for all the world that we have. It's kind of ironically, Greek mythology has kind of brought this back around, as Arden is like steeped in all the Percy Jackson and like she loves Greek mythology. And the idea there is that a god is a god and you're there to please the god. And we have a different understanding of God. And I thank God for that, for God's mercy. But there's still the notion of like, God is God. So why are we so testing? If God is God, why don't we just live up to God's standards, I suppose. But anyway, let me change subjects here a little bit in the same passage. Mark also goes out of his way, just like, I mean, other gospels I think are a little more graphic, but Mark goes out of his way to talk about the mockery of Jesus here. So he doesn't detail the lashes or whatever, but he details that they're spitting on him, they're beating him with a reed, but also like we're dressing him up like a king and bowing down to him. Like this is insult to injury at its finest, going on here. And when I look at it, it's appalling to me that one human could do that to another human. And so we do see the very sin that is unfair to God that Jesus is about to die for, to redeem, on full display. So it's not only an execution of a prisoner, it is a mocking of a way, a mocking of a lifestyle, a mocking of a human being, degrading this person down to a plaything. So I guess in the question of theodicy, if we're created good, what happens to, like, in your opinion, I guess, what does it take for one human to get to that point to be able to treat another person that way?
So I've thought about this a lot, and my thoughts are even more like centered around a piece of pop culture I've watched recently, as per usual with me. If you are 18 or older, there's an interesting movie out that Adam Driver is in called The Torture Report. That's based on a true story. That is just really fascinating, and it's really hard to watch. But it is important that it is hard to watch. That is part of the medium of the art of movies, is sometimes movies are challenging. So I've been thinking a lot about kind of what goes into the way we treat human beings, the way we treat other human beings. And whether it's physical torture or even some of the things like mentally and psychologically that we do to other humans, that can also be really violent as well. It's just maybe not as obvious, right? So I did some research, and for my scientifically leaning friends, which you'll have to probably correct me because you know way more about science than I do. There are very few animals in the animal kingdom that are as violent to their own species as humans are to each other.
100% correct.
Yeah. So to claim that I think for someone to claim, well, I just have a violent nature, I don't know about that. They did find, like, with some chimpanzees, which would be the animal that'd be closest to humans, that there are groups that will go against each other and that will fight each other for things, for goods, for necessities. They won't fight each other just because. And I think that is something to look at here, because again, the centurion's going to have a moment later, which is going to prove my point here. Nobody stands up and says anything until Jesus is dead and it's too late. And I've thought a lot about, I don't know how to answer the question, what makes a human so capable is to do this, other than the answer, as long as there's somebody else doing it with them, we become more capable of doing really horrible things when someone else joins us.
Yeah.
I think when we are, whether to people's faces or behind their back, when we're psychologically abusive to people, when we say mean things about them, or we're slanderous, or we just speak not kind things about people, I think it's, I don't say not unkind things about people to my wall, right? Like I say it with somebody else who's like, yeah, that person's terrible. And you're like, yeah, like, and it becomes a whole thing, right? And it's a funny example, but it's interesting, right? The things that we're capable of when we don't have somebody who's going to stop us are really interesting. Because also, like, you know what friend not to talk to about a certain other friend, because that friend will stop you from talking bad about that friend. So you don't talk to that friend about it. Like, we know. And so I don't know. I think what makes us capable is when we're going along, it's that Scoofy poster from middle school, and what we warn middle school kids about. I'm so fascinated by the TV stereotype of a bully, because it doesn't make sense. I never knew a single bully, right? The ones that make more sense are Mean Girls, where it's a head bully and some henchmen that support the head bully.
Right.
I don't know. That was a lot of rambling. What are your thoughts?
Well, no, I think you make a good point, because so like the bully, for example, like I'm thinking of the kid in middle school who, like, I didn't get bullied, thankfully, in middle school, but there were other people who did and there were probably three guys who went around and used I mean, they were bigger than everybody by that point, and used their, height and weight to an advantage. And so they did have a confirmation of that. And the assumption was always, well, they probably have a hard home life. And I think that there's some truth to that, but it still doesn't, like, if they're the independent bully, they're kind of somebody who has been backed into a corner and they're only fighting to survive emotionally or spiritually or something. But like you said, I think the majority of bullying is not, from what I can see, or at least, and have experienced myself in various times, is not the loner, outcast, drug addict, broken home person. It is the popular clique. Almost, it's the ones that we have power and we need to exert it over somebody else, and it's being confirmed in the laughter that I get from what I do to the loser at table 7, kind of thing, which I think expands onto a larger stage of, well, everybody in Rome is doing this. It's worked out for us, right? I'm getting confirmation because we went
empire.
Yeah, like I went to Germany and I conquered the Goths, and I went to Spain and I, had a little problem there, but eventually we pushed through, right? And so I do think it takes confirmation. I think it starts with maybe some inferiority, or starts with, I want to show my power. Steve comments that it sounds like a nature versus nurture thing, and I really do think, and I'm just looking at, so Katrina just had a kid, right? And every kid that grows up is needy and clingy and selfish, and has some sort of thing where you could say, okay, this kind of looks, they're selfish, but at the same point, they're perfect, right? And no kid grows up just thinking, okay, I'm going to go terrorize Jesus when I grow up. But once they get indoctrinated into a certain way of life with a certain worldview, right? That's confirmation of whatever, however, and how it gets started is it's some quest for power, or it's some quest to validate my existence and validate my attitude, which I think goes into slander, and I think goes into talking behind someone's back. Is the times I know when I have gossiped about somebody, it is because I don't like what they said about me, or I don't like what they said about something that I like, and so I'm going to go gain control over them behind their back by talking to somebody else who agrees with me, and then I'm just going to be in consensus with them and the other person can't do anything about it. So it's all a gain of control and having. So I think it just it. So when we look at Rwandan massacres, I really feel like we can only get to that point when it becomes when that becomes normal. I think the individual murders or stuff that happen on city streets, or that happen out of there are some that can happen out of desperation, that is trying gaining control over a situation, but like the mass scale things like this, where Rome is doing this on a continuous basis, just kind of it's just been told to me over and over again that the Tutsis shouldn't exist, or that the Jews shouldn't exist, or whatever. And so because I've been told that over and over again, and people celebrate when I do it, then it sure seems like a good thing to do.
Well, and if I move up in rank and in status when I do it, right? Like if you're a Roman soldier, your livelihood and your status depends upon your ability to be wildly violent.
Right.
And that's crazy. Like, and we look at that and we're like, oh my God, but like, what happens if we flip it? Like, what gets you the most, like and as much as we like try not to admit it, like we all feel good about ourselves when we make a Facebook post and it gets lots of likes. All right. Let's just, none of you are exempt from this.
No one's exempt from it.
Even if you hate Facebook, you want to get a post with a lot of likes. So my question would be, is a positive message that doesn't make fun of anybody else what gets you a lot of likes? Or is it if you go after the Houston Astros, or you go after a political party, or you go after people who think X, that gets you lots of likes and lots of shares? The soldier's entire livelihood depends on their ability to be violent and to be violent as a group.
Yeah.
And on what level have we made our livelihood on our ability to be slanderous, even if we think we are so right and so in line with whatever? I don't know. I'm getting punchy on my own self. Sorry.
No, you're fine. No, I've heard lots of stories from people in the corporate world who have been stabbed in the back so somebody else could advance. And they come away with this great sense of injustice of like, well, I was actually out earning this person, or I was doing this. And, granted, I'm usually only hearing their side of the story, but what they're describing sounds very unjust, and it sounds like this public mockery that leads to their demotion, the other person's promotion. But it gets celebrated because in the promotion, they're lifting up somebody who they think is benefiting the company more. And so morals go out the window as long as we're promoting the person who can earn us the most income and promote the company more. And Bill had a good point. I think we kind of touched on it a little bit. It says, how did being in a backwater assignment for the soldiers affect their perception of not only Jesus, but all Jews? And I think certainly, totally. If you are a Roman, the closer you got to Rome, the better. There wasn't a whole lot of glory in being in the backwater town of Jerusalem, away from your family, most likely, because you're not going to bring them down to Jerusalem and having this authority.
This is a Galilean. Like, this isn't even. This is not even a guy from Jerusalem.
Right.
So that's a really great question, Bill.
Yeah. All right, I'm going to move us on because I didn't realize it's already been close to an hour. And we're only in verse 21. So 21 through 24, short segment. They compelled a passerby who was coming in from the country to carry his cross. It was Simon of Cyrene, the father of Alexander and Rufus. Then they brought Jesus to the place called Golgotha, which means the place of a skull. And they offered him wine mixed with myrrh, but he did not take it. And they crucified him and divided his clothes among them, casting lots to decide what each should take. So just an interesting note, if you go read in Paul's letters in Romans 16:13, Rufus is actually mentioned again. along with his mother. And so it's kind of I did a sermon about this a few years ago. It's kind of an interesting parallel of somebody who was literally just kind of there. In fact, he was an immigrant, because Cyrene is over closer to Egypt. Was just kind of there, got pulled into action, and then had such a profound experience that Rufus ends up being part of the early church movement, which was a pretty risky thing to do. So it's also just interesting because every time I read the word Rufus, I think of Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure, and Rufus, the character in there. So shout out to anybody who's a Bill and Ted fan. So another thing in here is similar to the silence that Jesus expresses. Jesus refuses this sedative. So the wine and myrrh is basically like ether. It's gonna dull the pain. Can you give is there any importance to really physically suffering in the crucifixion? Or experiencing suffering, I guess.
You cut out a little bit. Can you ask the question again?
Yeah, it was just so Jesus is refusing basically the sedative that will make him feel better and dull the pain of all of this. Is there any importance as Jesus is getting crucified for him to experience pain for us, or is this just Jesus being tough?
Good question, which you did ask in advance. So my lack of response time. I don't know, because, like when Jesus drinks a sour wine that's dipped on a sponge in a different gospel, does that mean the suffering according to Luke is different? I don't know. I don't know if that kind of ticky-tack detail is one to get caught up on. I do think there is something to Prophet Isaiah talks a lot about the Messiah will be the suffering servant of us all. And so I think there's something to not taking the sedative, or kind of whatever the other word you used kind of for what wine and myrrh might be. There's something to taking on the whole experience. And I think too that Jesus kind of leaves no room for excuses to be made for him. He carried the cross for as long as he could, and then an African refugee carried it for him the rest of the way. Like if you think Jesus is low on the scale, like add in African refugee.
Right.
So I think I think Jesus is just eliminating, it wasn't that bad for him because he was drunk. Well, no. I think it's just eliminating an excuse that people may have been able to say or use. And the wine and myrrh was something that like Roman soldiers used a lot. And I even read in an article, like they would have some like every night they had to sleep on the ground, which that is fascinating to me. Like a little NyQuil, that they had some homemade NyQuil, I guess. Yeah, I don't know.
Give a lot of credit to our ancestors for innovation.
Bless them. Yeah. I mean, just they were like, yeah, like the discomfort of soldier life, like sleeping on the ground. I'm like, that's the most uncomfortable thing they have to do. I think too, there's this total and complete in this section that goes with what came before it. All honor is gone, right? Any honor that they would have had for Jesus, any regard you have for a king or a Messiah or a person is gone. And so I think even Jesus not participating in this little basic human thing that they give him of the thing they have to go to sleep every night is just living into the full experience that, this is what's happening.
Do you think it adds a little bit to the I was thinking about, I was watching a show at the gym this morning, and it's the Marvel Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., and this guy creates an android who kind of like experiences human life but can't feel emotions. And the constant back and forth is whether or not she is actually feeling something. Is she becoming human? The robot, yeah. So this guy's getting beaten on the floor, right? This guy's getting beaten on the floor, and the episode is teasing that she might be developing empathy in her android brain. And it's kind of the whole season is kind of this question of what is a human anyway. So
very deep for Marvel.
It's very deep for Marvel. Marvel goes, I think
gone way beyond like Thanos is a bad guy, let's get him.
Yeah, no, I think actually most of Marvel's stuff asks some really deep questions. But so this one, so she has been kind of teasing, and the last thing I saw before I turned it off was this guy's getting beaten, and she's looking through a window and sees it. And so the thing I'm like, I want to turn it back on because I want to know, is this the point in which someone's getting beaten so much that we finally step in? Like you said, that Jesus is dead and then the centurion has his moment. And so I want to know, like, is him refusing the wine, I see someone that's so bad that I eventually get off my high horse, and instead of thinking about my needs and my rights or my empire or whatever, I'm finally having empathy for the suffering servant and agree that, okay, this guy really is doing something quite awe-inspiring here. If that's part of it. I think Keri Don brings up a point is, does he want to be fully aware of his senses or words that the sedative might have dulled, and we wouldn't have gotten things like, Father, forgive them for they know not what they do. The reason I brought up this question is because of some of the, I didn't look up when the controversies were versus when Mark was written, but early on in the church, there was a big debate. We often have this really rosy version of the early church that everyone got along, sang Kumbaya all the time for 100 years, and there was this big debate on whether Jesus actually suffered or Jesus actually died, or
if the God part of Jesus left Jesus before.
Yeah. So it was like, okay, well, did the God part leave and the human died? Did Jesus like get freed of his physical self so he didn't have to experience this because God can't die? And it was this, I mean, there were multiple different things. And
years of arguing.
Yeah, years and years of arguing. And people put to death about the Arius was the guy who got killed. Yes. In fact, St. Nicholas punched somebody at a conference. Santa Claus punched somebody at a conference.
Punched somebody, and with that,
he actually punched Arius. Yeah, he punched Arius. So next time St. Nicholas brings you presents, remember he's also punching heretics.
Oh my God.
So that's our bedtime story for the night. Yeah, presumed heretics. So I wonder,
they were all heretics at the time.
Yeah, I wonder if Mark was putting this in here because of those conversations about, like, he wants us to know that Jesus is fully God, fully human, and taking the full brunt, taking the full brunt of sin upon him with the pain. So, all right, let me move us on to verse 25 through 39 here to keep on track. Oh, Laura Howard chimed in with a smiley face for the bedtime story. So hope Barrett and Hudson have a whole new appreciation for Santa Claus now. All right, verse 25. We ruined Christmas. That, or we made it better for all like the action hero people. All right, 25. It was 9 o'clock in the morning when they crucified him. The inscription of the charge against him read, "The King of the Jews." And with him they crucified 2 bandits, one on his right and one on his left. Those who passed by derided him, shaking their heads and saying, "Aha! You who would destroy the temple and build it in 3 days, save yourself and come down from the cross." In the same way, the chief priests, along with the scribes, were also mocking him among themselves and saying, "He saved others, he cannot save himself. Let the Messiah, the King of Israel, come down from the cross now, so that we may see and believe." Those who were crucified with him also taunted him. When it was noon, darkness came over the whole land until 3 in the afternoon. At 3 o'clock, Jesus cried out with a loud voice, "Eloi, Eloi, lema sabachthani," which means, my God, why have you forsaken me?" When some of the bystanders heard it, they said, "Listen, he is calling for Elijah." And someone ran, filled a sponge with sour wine, put it on a stick, and gave it to him to drink, saying, "Wait, let us see whether Elijah will come to take him down." Then Jesus gave a loud cry and breathed his last, and the curtain of the temple was torn in two from top to bottom. Now when the centurion who stood facing him saw that in his saw that in this way he breathed his last, he said, "Truly, this man was God's son." Now,
Thanks for claiming that, Centurion. Really
right?
helpful in
Yeah,
this moment.
little too late. Little too late. One of the interesting parts in here for me is it's kind of a duel between more mocking and hope. We've got the
Yeah.
chief priests who continue mocking Jesus in all these really explicit ways, just happy to be rid of Jesus. But then it's the bystanders who hear him say Eloi, Eloi, and they think there's speculation that they think he's saying Elijah. And so Elijah was prophesied to come before the Messiah. That when Elijah, because if you remember, Elijah is one of like the few people besides Enoch who never dies in the Old Testament. Um, as he hands the reins of lead prophet to Elisha in Second Kings, Elijah is just taken up to heaven in this chariot of fire. So the Jewish
Which
understanding
sounds
is
awesome.
it does sound awesome. That should be so. You didn't get to go skydiving this year. You should put the chariot of fire whisking you away on your bucket list to try sometime.
Yeah.
Deal?
We'll put,
Okay.
sure.
Yeah.
You
And if you
arrange
don't
it.
hum
We'll ride
if
around
you
in a chariot of fire at Creekwood.
if you don't hum the Chariots of Fire theme song, it doesn't
That's what
count.
I was going to say. Yeah. Like when Elijah went up, man, I got to believe, like, before its time, Chariots of Fire was playing as he was going up in the chariot of fire.
Oh,
Like,
absolutely.
nothing else.
Dun, 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 dun,
Oh
dun.
my gosh.
Um,
Great.
all
We have
right,
lost self
so
control. We're punching Santa Claus. We are singing Chariots of Fire. We're very heretical tonight.
if we put slowed down pictures of Santa Claus punching Arius with the Chariots of Fire theme music, I think that would probably get you a lot of likes on Facebook.
Sure.
Just
Yep.
saying. Maybe that's more of a
Okay.
Twitter thing. So yeah, so anyway, the Jews expected Elijah to come back before the Messiah was to come.
Yeah.
And like so we look back in retrospect and kind of say that John the Baptist fit this Elijah picture. That's why John the Baptist is painted wearing camel hair and eating locusts and doing the things that Elijah did. He's painted as the Elijah figure that precedes the Messiah of Jesus. But what these people are looking at is saying, "Oh my gosh, if he's saying Elijah, is this the moment when Elijah's going to sweep down, take him off the cross?" And so these are actually people who are like, "Wait, maybe Jesus is the Messiah." And so they
Yeah.
give him this wine, trying to revive him at 3 o'clock with some kind of hope. And again, it's a little too late here that people are coming around. Um, so one of the more interesting things in Mark's gospel here is when Jesus cries out, my God, why have you forsaken me?" And you can interpret it for what you want. I just want to know, how does it make you feel? I would love for everybody to answer this in the comments. Is How does it make you feel when Jesus screams out, my God, why have you forsaken me?"
Do you want me to answer now while we're waiting?
Yeah, go for it.
Um, so it's interesting, right? And there's a ton of theological theories to dive into, and people's doctrine of the Trinity gets whack here. But I think on a base level, when we see what is the most important character to come forth in the whole of Scripture thus far, even has a moment of lament. And Jesus is quoting, for my Old Testament nerds out there, Jesus is quoting Psalm 22, which is supposedly written by David, not David Lessner, but King David.
You beat me to it.
And so King David, who's a good king, who's promised, well, mostly good. Adultery is not ideal.
Nor murder.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
None of the above. But David's promised to be king forever and ever and ever and ever. And then Jesus comes along and quotes his great grandfather, basically, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so there's this cool, like, Old Testament moment, but I think there's also this psychological and just plain, like, emotional moment of suffering's not fun.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I think there are times, like, And sorry, kids, if you're going to bed, now I'm going to use a word you shouldn't use, but sometimes things just suck. Like,
Mm-hmm.
they're like, I don't remember. I was talking with Allison about something. Oh, we were talking about middle school. And we were talking about it today, and she goes, middle school just sucks. Like, sometimes, like, we just, like, crucifixion, that sucked. Like, that would be
Mm-hmm.
the modern day version of what Jesus would say. This sucks, right? But sometimes we just have to lament. Like, we just have to, and I think the fact that Jesus' lament is a conversation with God, is a really beautiful thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
It is, I think, something in 2020 we find more relatable than maybe we've ever found before.
Yeah.
Right. And so, I don't know. I just think it gives us permission to lament in conversation with God rather than lament and pretend like God can't hear us.
Right. Yeah. It brings in the human factor to Jesus' death again, too. Right? To be redemption. Paul says it in a weird way, but if sin came through the first Adam, then redemption comes through the second Adam. For that theory. And if Jesus is fully human and experiencing this the same way that we experience pain that we want redemption for, and death that we want redemption from, and sin that we need to escape, then if he doesn't experience it in the same way that we experience things, they're just awful. I mean,
Yeah.
then and then again, I think it becomes a theological construct or like a Superman moment, as opposed to something that when I am going through my worst time, I know that Jesus is there with me. And I know that at the end is hope. I mean, even at the end of Psalm 22 is my God, why have you forsaken me? And then it turns into, but I know that you're with me.
Yep.
Which is a, interesting twist of emotions there. But, yeah, I think it feels, I mean, when I ask the question, how does it feel? When I'm in a good mood, it feels confusing. When I'm in my normal Enneagram 3 mode, where I want everything to be really professional and perfect and look strong, it's bizarre that Jesus would do this instead of admitting his own suffering, just like give the side eye to the Roman guards and be like, "Yeah, you don't know what's coming next." But in that's the movie I'm gonna make.
Oh
But
my
in
God.
the but in like my weak points, right? I mean, today was a pretty rough day with several funeral things going on and living with people's fears and pains. And to be able to sit in a hospital consultation room with a woman who literally had lost her husband 30 minutes before I got there and realize that even Jesus has experienced that absence. And Jesus has experienced what it means to lose. I think it's hard to feel at the moment of grief. It's one of those things where we can't make sense of it while we're grieving, but it seems to be relatable. Like it seems to feel better knowing that our God has done that. And I appreciate people chiming in with feeling of alone, or how it feels when it appears God has abandoned us. And
Yeah.
so I appreciate y'all chiming in on that. And I'm gonna
Can I,
go ahead and add more.
before you
Yeah.
move on, no, I want to read a little bit of Psalm 22 just to give us the context and just to kind of hear some of that. Is that okay if I take a
Yeah,
second?
go for it. No,
Okay.
this is important. Yeah, because I think Jesus is doing that intentionally.
Yeah. Yeah. So this is Psalm 22. If you want to flip back, or if you just want to listen and kind of take it in, because I am reading the comments and I think we've had just some like somewhat negative and overwhelming reactions to what we're seeing with Jesus.
Yeah.
But this is what he's quoting. So Psalm 22. I'm just going to read portions because it's kind of long. It says, my God, why have you forsaken me? Why are you so far from helping me from the words of my groaning? Oh my God, I cry by day, but you do not answer, and by night, but find no rest. Yet you are holy, enthroned on the praises of Israel. And you, our ancestors, trusted. They trusted, and you delivered them. To you they cried and were saved. And you they trusted, and they were not put to shame. And that's just the first 5 verses. It makes the turn
Pretty quick.
in that first section, and it goes on, and it's really. I would encourage everybody watching to maybe read that before they go to bed tonight, just to kind of take another look at what Jesus is quoting. But it's a really interesting psalm of all, 150 of them. It's a really interesting one to be the one to quote because it's one that makes the turn. It's a psalm of lament that makes the turn about as fast as possible.
Yeah, because usually a lot of psalms of lament include something at the end of like, but I'll still praise you.
Like one
But
verse,
it,
they're like, but it's
yeah,
fine.
but it's like at the very end, and this one does make the turn pretty quickly. So
Yeah.
I think it's a little bit. I mean, Casting Crowns has a song, "I'll Praise You in the Storm," and I think it's the understanding that not everything is going to go exactly as we planned, but we're still going to trust that at the end of the day, God's going to do something, right? That God's
Right.
still going to be there and still going to move. And I think that's that's part of the good news, right? If this is all unfair and it's all unjust and we feel helpless and alone, but our faith suggests that we aren't, is really comforting. So, so the Roman centurion, you've been waiting. What is it? So the thing that the point that I should make in here is where they're at and the crucifixion is happening is not next to the temple where they can see the Holy of Holies. So the curtain ripping is somewhere other, but that's inserted in as it probably. So the Roman soldier isn't seeing the curtain ripping here. What do you make
And
of
it's
his
not
just
being live tweeted.
and it's not being live tweeted? Yeah, no live feed or Instagram. I think there was probably an influencer taking a selfie by the curtain, like curtain torn in two.
Hashtag ridge curtain.
Hashtag torn in two. Hashtag God is with us.
Oh my gosh. We
So
used to
what
be
do you?
so professional at the beginning of this Bible study, and now we're like, yeah, people taking pictures with the ripped curtain.
I don't know if we were ever professional at this Bible study. We'll see. I have to go back and look.
Oh gosh.
So what do you
Anyways,
think
your
happens?
question.
Yeah, like what do you think this guy's experience with this moment? Like, what do you think happens that causes him to flip from like I'm going to torture you and mock you to this is the Son of God? What do you think his experience is? Because this is kind of the experience that people have when they come to know that Christ loves them or when they fully accept Christ as their savior. Sometimes it can be radical like this. So I guess what would you say about the centurion?
So I kind of have two ways of looking at it. So for one, so I am not a person who had like a moment
Right.
where it went from not knowing to this like radical experience and like, oh, I've got it, I get it kind of deal. So I don't understand that personally.
Yeah.
I have not experienced it. I've watched it happen. And it can be a really powerful and moving and life-changing experience. So there's totally something that could have happened, right? I think about like in Hebrew, like the word pneuma or ruah that means like wind also means spirit, right? So like what if he had an experience of wind or of spirit or of breath? Because it says the way that Jesus breathed his last breath, the way that he breathed his last spirit, the way he breathed his last ruah, changed it for him. But I also wonder if there's a little bit more of a sociological approach to, was the centurion the whole time thinking it but not saying it because it wasn't popular?
Yeah.
And then said it when it was safe, you know? We don't stand up to the bully until the high school reunion when we're more successful than the bully and we just get to be a bully ourselves, right? Like,
Right.
is this a moment? Is this a teaching moment where why didn't he say that 6 hours before? And even, and we didn't talk about this very much, but the two that are crucified next to Jesus in Mark's version both mock him, right? In Matthew and Luke's version, you get this like one is saved or whatever. In this version, that doesn't happen, right? So even in Centurion, Jesus is dying. The two guys who are dying next to him are mocking him. The centurion doesn't even say in that moment, like, watch your mouth. That's God's son. Like,
let's treat this guy with respect here.
Man, so, or they're dishing his stuff out by playing a game. Like, none of it up to this point. So that's kind of, I've got those two approaches is one, does he have this radical experience of the Spirit that totally is legitimate, totally could change everything? Great. And we have no idea what happens to him after this. Like, this is all we
Right.
get. Or did he wait until it was safe to say what he was thinking the whole time?
Yeah. So for those of you watching, if you've never seen an old movie called The Robe, it may be Charlton Heston. I'm not totally sure, but it's the guy who won the purple robe in the dice game. It looks at his life. So he's a part of the
Oh,
crucifixion of
cool.
Jesus. He wins the purple robe in the dice game. And every time he wears it, he has this like really convicting experience. And he tries to get rid of it and he can't shake it. And he ends up like, I'm not going to spoil the whole movie, but it's a really interesting look at empathy. And that's where when I read this story, it makes me think of The Force Awakens, the first of the new Star Wars trilogy with Finn, the stormtrooper, who
Yeah.
sees all these innocent people just getting blown to bits, and then he's got his own, stormtrooper buddy leaves the bloody print, and he realize like it just becomes real for him. It's not
Right.
a worldview anymore. It's not just something to
And like
partake
all
in.
his training, like, goes away. The way he describes it,
Yeah,
like in episode 9, he was like, I just couldn't do it. Like, even though I had been taught my whole life to do it, I knew it wasn't right. Like, I knew in that moment.
yeah. And I'm wondering if Jesus is the first one who hasn't been just begging and pleading,
Yeah.
and which I think could like be confused for, oh well, they're just trying to get their innocence. He's the one who kind of dies with dignity,
Yeah.
and just takes it and knows, and has power in his silence. So I'm curious if that was an awe-inspiring moment for him of the Roman centurion looking at Jesus in this moment and being like, oh shoot, okay, this is somebody different.
Yeah.
Um, the other thing that I had not thought about, like literally until I was reading this, is Mark starts out with, so right, we've got the insider outsider, we've got the competition theme of competition throughout the whole thing, and it starts out with this is the testament, this is the story of Jesus, who is God's son, right off the very beginning, and it really doesn't say that from my memory, and again until here. Um, and I have to go back and look and see if it does talk about Jesus as God's son in any other place.
It's just
Because
Bartimaeus and Peter that will claim Messiah, but
Messiah, but so that's what
it,
I'm wondering
yeah,
if
not
it's like a bookend of
maybe.
if the arc of Mark. That's a great little rhyme there. But if the story arc of Mark is the competition of Jesus starting from a lowly Galilean to now he's won over the empire in the form of the centurion.
Yeah.
Like Jesus through death has won. Jesus through humility has conquered. Jesus has finally won the fight that's been going on the entire time in Mark to where, and then we're gonna see somebody from the Sanhedrin of Joseph of Arimathea, along with Mary Magdalene, who was, at some point healed of all these things. Now they're going to be together in actually taking care of Jesus, and so Jesus has cured the insider outsider device. I'm just curious if this is actually just like a bookend here
Yeah.
of Jesus finally winning
Well, and the
that
thing that
role.
Mark spoils from the very beginning, it takes, a pinnacle moment in the Gospel of Mark is when somebody else who's not the audience realizes that Jesus is the Messiah, I think is the
Mm-hmm.
word that Peter uses. And Bartimaeus just says son of David. That's the only assumption that's given there. Or that's the farthest it gets. So it's certainly, yeah, it is this. I mean, in a TV show, isn't it always like interesting when the audience knows before the other characters, right?
Mm-hmm.
When Ross cheats on Rachel from the girl with the copy place, and you spend a whole episode trying to make sure Rachel doesn't find out, and then when you find out she does, you're like, oh my gosh, like the impact that has on an audience.
Yeah.
Even though you already know as the audience, but watching a character learn that. So isn't it interesting? At the beginning, the whole audience is let in on what's happening, on what's going to happen,
Mm-hmm.
but it's the guy in charge of the people who tortured and killed him that totally gets it without
Right.
any teaching or instruction or miracles needed to prove it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Dang.
Yeah. So I mean, and just from a simple standpoint, because I've been saying this has been a powerful experience for me just to read through it, is it just, I mean, it speaks to the power of this moment and who Jesus is
Yeah.
from a purely miraculous spiritual standpoint. When you see somebody who doesn't have the background training, is just a guy who's been involved in doing his job and torturing people for a living and jailing and being part of an empire, who all of a sudden falls on his knees in search of mercy. Like I've been, I mean, I never had the huge like spiritual, I mean, I've had lots of spiritual experiences and conversion moments, but I haven't had like the one. But I've seen a lot of awakening moments, and I've been privileged to watch those happen. And I think it just speaks to, I think we sometimes try and humanize Jesus a little too much. And so Mark comes out of his human Jesus, and like all of a sudden there's this massive power with a temple curtain rushing. And so I think we sometimes lose the power in just how awesome Jesus is. We forget about that because we're good for other things that, take our mind off of the main goal here. So let me, in the last 5 minutes, let me read this last part here. This is verse 40 through 47. It says, there were also women looking on from a distance. Among them were Mary Magdalene and Mary, the mother of James, the younger, and of, I'm guessing that's Joseph. I don't really know how to say that. And Salome. They used to follow him and provided for him when he was in Galilee. And there were many other women who had come up with him to Jerusalem. This is like 2 verses to give a shout out to all the women out there who were like the real bones and muscle of the operation. Because they're on the outside look.
This is the first woman in the gospel to be named.
Yeah. I just think like this is like you said, everything in Mark matters. And the fact that like Mark takes the time out to be like, so these are the people who really get it, because they're not running away naked or cutting off ears. They're there watching from a distance or denying. Yeah. So they become kind of the heartbeat or the backbone of this whole movement here. So verse 40.
The author includes the details that they've been there the whole time.
Right.
They didn't just show up in the death and not run away and call it good.
Yeah, like one of the worst things that Leonardo da Vinci did, and he didn't do many bad things because he was pretty brilliant, but was the Last Supper painting with just the 12. And so our entire mindset is that they're all on one side of the table. With just these 12 doing that instead of, and I know the Gospels talk about him being with his followers and his disciples, but we lose the idea that all these people who have been incredibly faithful and bankrolling Jesus's operation and taking care of him and everything, they were all there. I mean, they probably were all there. There's probably 50 to 60 to 100 people in this room, and I've been there. It's pretty big for a room in Jerusalem. At least I remember it being there that big. So
I always picture, like when I look at Da Vinci's painting, like the women were the ones taking the picture. They're on the other side of the table, and they're the ones taking it because they were there.
Right. Because nobody asked me to take their picture when in front of the Eiffel Tower or whatever thing. Everybody always gets Lindsay to take the picture. I'm assuming there's just a stereotype that she's better.
She knows what she's doing.
Probably so, yeah. They probably look at me and they're like, yeah, probably not. Let's move on. He probably doesn't even know where the camera is.
Oh my God.
All right, 42 through the end. When evening had come, and since it was the day of preparation, that is, the day before the Sabbath, Joseph of Arimathea, a respected member of the council, so he's a Pharisee, who was also himself waiting expectantly for the kingdom of God, went boldly to Pilate and asked for the body of Jesus. Then Pilate wondered if he were already dead, and summoning the centurion, he asked him whether he had been dead or for some time. When he learned from the centurion that he was dead, he granted the body to Joseph. Then Joseph bought a linen cloth, and taking down the body, wrapped it in the linen cloth and laid it in a tomb that had been hewn out of the rock. He then rolled a stone against the door of the tomb. Mary Magdalene and Mary, the mother of Joseph, saw where the body was laid. You know what? So I've always read that like Mary, the mother of Jesus, at the end of Mark, and it's Joseph, who apparently is somebody different. I wonder if they ever got confused in early Torah class. Jesus and Joseph, but so we hear it for the women. So Joseph of Arimathea is kind of this interesting character in the last couple of minutes here, who has been covertly admiring Jesus from afar. Like he didn't stand up at the council and be like, so maybe this guy isn't really that bad. at all. And we know from John, Nicodemus was another Pharisee who bought into what Jesus was teaching. So like there are spies on the inside who aren't really saying anything. Do we blame him for not saying anything? Does he out himself here and make a stand finally? Like, what do we make of Joseph of Arimathea here?
So it's an interesting question because it is the religious people who plot. Like in chapter 3, Mark
Right.
tells us they figure out a plan to kill him. Like it's never like banishment. Like they don't really go for any like low key ways of getting rid of someone. Like
Hey, go big
cancel
or go home.
culture. Yeah, cancel culture is not a thing yet. So again, I'd pose the same question as the centurion. Did Joseph have this great moment where he stepped up and I think that Joseph did risk something here because I think the Pharisees look at Jesus's death and we don't see any Pharisees having any revelations here, right? It's
Right.
the centurion who does. So this is victory day, right? We got rid of that guy who told us that our higher status doesn't matter anymore. So I do think he is risking something by giving Jesus a proper Jewish burial. And again, there's nothing in the text that communicates that. So I'm really just guessing here.
Right.
And at the same time, man, like, don't you wish he would have stood up to the bully a little bit sooner?
Yeah. I just think Joseph fits. So I didn't think about it because the way you're talking about it sounds like Joseph, like the centurion. He's a Pharisee, so he's waiting for the resurrection. He's waiting for the Messiah to come, and maybe this is just the moment he stepped. So maybe he wasn't like a secret admirer the whole time. Maybe this is kind of like, oh yeah, this is the Son of God. Okay, I need to do my thing. Guess I missed it early on. So I hadn't thought about it that way because he's always been painted as this like secret follower.
He's
and I
always
wonder
painted
if he
as a
really,
good guy because he does
yeah.
one good thing.
But
was he shouting, "Crucify him" 8 hours
right
before that?
And that's what we don't know. It really isn't. Joseph is just an interesting character for me because so many in where we live fit into this. I can afford to buy the linen cloth. I can afford to buy the tomb. I can afford to do these things, but I'm not willing to risk my reputation or my status right now in order to say something before. And I wonder if we're so afraid to lose the ability to, we're very good at honoring dead people and we're very good at honoring things that are not going to impact us anymore necessarily. We fear the risk-taking actions. And so I'm wondering if Joseph of Arimathea is kind of like all of us, or not all of us, but a lot of us that we're just afraid to go for it when it matters, as opposed to just honoring and taking care of after the fact. For that. Before we leave, I just want to say how awesome, like verse 47 for some reason to me is the Mary Magdalene and Mary, the mother of Joseph, saw where the body was laid. And I just like have this image in my mind of them spy crawling up a hill and like snooping with binoculars to try and source the location. Like they're not supposed to be there. So for some reason, that verse stands out to me to show just how devoted these followers are to Jesus. That they are willing, like they want to make sure they know where he is. So either A, I can look for the resurrection, which they're not because they go to dress the body later. But just where everybody else scatters, these two women are so dedicated that they want to know where he is so that they can still celebrate him. I just think that's an important thing.
It'll add to the reader gets all the information that the characters do not. And so when the people don't believe the women, I think that's an added detail that like, nope, they knew exactly where he was. Like they didn't go the wrong place.
Right.
Like, I think it just adds to kind of what we see here in a little bit. Or next week. So there's your cliffhanger for.
Yeah. Tune in next week. We've got resurrection after we've had our crucifixion moments. Maybe resurrection. We'll see.
And
Um,
two endings in Mark. You guys don't
yeah,
even know. Mark has two endings. One is real and one is not. Maybe.
right. Yeah, we're gonna get into all sorts of how the Bible was written next week with the second ending of Mark kind of thing.
I like secret ending of Mark. Like it's a
Secret ending of
yeah, I
Mark.
thought you said secret at first. I was like, oh my gosh.
We need somebody with a handlebar mustache to
You've got
be
a
able
week.
to. I, you
Because
know,
Kelly
my
Carpenter's our guest, so
well, I don't. I probably got a better chance than she does, but I don't think a week's gonna cover it for me with a handlebar mustache.
oh gosh.
Well, Kelly's in theater person. She could probably drum up some sort
Oh,
of prop.
true. She
Yeah.
could.
So, anyway, all right, everybody. We are so grateful that you took your time to dive in again to the Gospel of Mark. I know it's brought a lot to my life in these moments, and so I hope it is for you as well. It's also nice to turn to our roots with just me and Lynn here to wax poetically and awkwardly and weirdly about the Gospel of Mark. And I say
Probably
weirdly
more
because we talked about
awkward. Yeah,
probably more
probably more
awkwardly.
awkward and weird than poetic, but sure. At least
No,
from
there were
my
some
end.
poetic moments. No, I think you're talking about all of the atonement stuff was really well done. I think you need to look back on that before
Thanks.
the ordination interviews.
Oh
So,
gosh.
all right, everyone. So just rest in knowing that, well, we don't know anything from, we don't know, it doesn't say anything about sin here, or atonement in the Gospel of Mark, but we do know that Jesus is the Son of God from Mark, and hopefully you've experienced that as well, knowing that the Son of God uh, has suffered alongside of us and knows what we're going through. And so if you're somebody struggling right now, know that not only are we here for you, but the Spirit of Christ is with us and with you. And we're here to all take care of each other in that same spirit. So, because new life will come out of everything. With that, we say adieu and we will see you next week.